I never thought one night could change everything between us. But when our parents left, something happened. Something I still can't explain. Something I can't forget. And I don't think he can either. You ever have a moment that feels so small at first? Just a fleeting second. Something you could easily brush off, but deep down, you know it changed everything. That's what this was. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. That I imagined the way his eyes lingered a little too long. That the silence between us wasn't really loaded with something else, something unspoken. But then the moments started adding up. And before I knew it, we were standing at the edge of something neither of us knew how to step away from. What you're about to hear is real. This isn't some made-up story. This happened. And I never imagined I'd be saying this out loud. But I need you to hear it. I need you to understand how easy it is for something innocent to turn into something you never expected, never wanted, but somehow still couldn't stop. Because the truth is, people think they know themselves. They think they know what they would never do. Until one night, one glance, one touch makes them question everything. And the scariest part? It doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks up on you. Slowly, quietly, until suddenly you realize you're in too deep. And there's no way out. I know a lot of people are going to judge me for this. I know some of you will say, I would never let that happen. But before you do, listen to the whole story. And then ask yourself, are you sure? Are you really sure? If you've ever been in a situation where emotions became confusing, where the lines blurred before you even realized it, tell me in the comments. I want to know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga and turn on your post notifications because some secrets should never stay hidden. My name is Emma. I'm 21 years old. I don't know when it started. I don't know the exact moment when the warmth in our home began to fade, when laughter became something we had to search for instead of something that came easily. I just know that one day I looked around and realized everything felt different, distant. Like the people inside this house were just passing through, each in their own little world, barely noticing each other. My parents? They were always busy. Work, responsibilities, expectations. It was like their entire existence revolved around something bigger than this house, something bigger than us. They weren't bad people. They weren't cruel. But they were absent. Physically sometimes. Emotionally, almost always. Growing up, I got used to the feeling of being alone even when I wasn't. Used to the kind of silence that fills a house even when people are inside it. Used to speaking and not really being heard. But my brother, Emmanuel, he was different. We used to be close. As kids, we were inseparable. Late-night whispers under the covers, building forts in the living room, laughing at jokes that only we understood. He was my best friend before I even knew what that word really meant. But then, life happened. We got older. Things changed. He changed. He wasn't a little boy anymore. The years stretched between us in ways I didn't fully understand. He grew taller, stronger, more confident. People noticed him now in ways they never used to. And slowly, so did I. It wasn't something I wanted. It wasn't something I planned. But feelings don't ask for permission before they creep in, before they start to shift the way you see someone, before they start making you question what you've always known to be true. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, that should have meant nothing. The way his voice had deepened, the way he carried himself now, the quiet confidence in his movements. The way he looked at me sometimes, as if he was seeing me differently too. I ignored it. I had to. I told myself it was just nostalgia, just memories tricking me into thinking something had changed when really, nothing had. But then, little by little, the space between us began to close again. Not in the way it had when we were kids. This was different. This was something I didn't know how to name. And then, our parents left. And that's when everything changed. When our parents told us they were leaving for the weekend, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. They had a business trip, something important, something that required them to be away. They barely looked up from their phones as they packed, rattling off rules we already knew by heart. Don't have anyone over, don't stay up too late, don't burn the house down. I nodded. Emmanuel did too. We were used to this. But this time felt different. I remember watching them walk out the door, their goodbyes rushed, like they were already thinking about something else. And then, they were gone. At first, it was exciting. Freedom, independence, no rules. We could eat whatever we wanted, sleep whenever we wanted, do whatever we wanted. It felt like a break from the routine, from the weight of expectations that always hung over us like a heavy cloud. I suggested a movie. Something easy, something familiar. Something to pass the time. I don't know when I started noticing the way Emmanuel sat closer than usual. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was just the way the couch was too small, the way it forced us into the same space. Or maybe I just hadn't let myself notice before. At first, it was nothing. Just two siblings sitting side by side, sharing a blanket. We'd done this 1,000 times before. But this time, the air felt heavier. I don't know if it was the movie, or the dim light of the TV screen flickering across his face, or the way the silence stretched between us in a way that felt less like comfort and more like something else. But then he laughed, low, quiet, almost teasing. And I turned to look at him. It was just a joke. Just a passing comment about the way I jumped at a scene, about the way I always got too invested in movies. But there was something in his voice, something underneath the words that made my breath catch for just a second too long. And then, he touched my hand. It was nothing at first. Just an accident. A brush of fingers, light, barely there. But neither of us moved away. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That I was imagining things. That I was overthinking. But my heart was pounding. And I knew. He felt it too. I laughed it off. Shifted slightly, pretending I needed to adjust my seat. But the warmth of his touch still lingered on my skin. And when I glanced at him from the corner of my eye, he was already looking at me. I should have looked away. I should have broken the moment, shattered whatever was forming between us before it could take shape. But I didn't. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind playing the same moment over and over again like a scene from a movie I couldn't turn off. The way his fingers had barely brushed against mine. The way his eyes had lingered a second too long. The way the air between us had thickened into something almost tangible. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Just my imagination, twisting things, turning them into something they weren't. I was tired. The house was too quiet. My mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Because I felt it. The shift. The unspoken words that hovered between us. The way his touch had sent a current through me, sharp and sudden, like stepping into cold water. It wasn't just my mind. It was real. And that terrified me. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the thoughts away. But as soon as I did, memories came rushing back. Memories I hadn't let myself think about in years. Emmanuel and I had always been close. As kids, we were inseparable. He was my first friend, my protector, the only person who ever truly saw me. I remembered summer afternoons playing in the backyard, running through the sprinklers, laughing until our stomachs hurt. I remembered the way he used to hold my hand when we crossed the street, the way he always looked out for me, the way we could sit in comfortable silence without ever feeling the need to fill it. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. We had changed. And I had never stopped to wonder when or how it happened. I turned onto my side, hugging my pillow tighter, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. Why was I even thinking about this? Why was I letting my mind go to places it shouldn't? It was just a moment. Just a lingering look, a fleeting touch. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. And yet, I knew tomorrow would feel different. I knew I would wake up and see him differently. Or maybe I had already started to. I wasn't sure if I was afraid of that, or if I was anticipating it. The next morning, I told myself I would act normal. That nothing had happened. That nothing had to change. It was just another day, just another morning in an empty house. I walked into the kitchen, still groggy from barely sleeping, and there he was. Emmanuel. Sitting at the counter, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. I hesitated for just a second before walking past him, pretending I didn't notice the way my heartbeat quickened just from seeing him. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice casual, controlled. "Morning," he answered, and for a moment it was fine. Just a simple exchange, like any other day. But then I reached for a cup, and he did too, at the exact same time. Our hands brushed, just like they had last night. I should have pulled away. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Neither did he. It lasted too long. A beat too long. And when I finally pulled back, I felt the warmth of his skin lingering on mine, refusing to fade. I busied myself making coffee, trying to focus on anything but the way the air felt heavier, the way the silence stretched between us in a way that felt less like comfort and more like a question waiting to be answered. We ate breakfast together, just like we always did. We talked, we joked, we played along with the script of normalcy. But something was different. The accidental touches started feeling less accidental. The way his knee brushed against mine under the table, the way his fingers hovered just a little too close when he passed me a plate, the way our eyes met and held for just a second too long before we looked away. And then, out of nowhere, he asked me something. Something strange. Something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Have you ever felt like you were supposed to meet someone in a different life?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He shrugged, playing with the edge of his fork. Like, maybe in another version of the world, things were different. Maybe we were different. I forced out a small laugh, trying to keep the conversation light. That's such a weird thing to ask. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me, searching, like he was waiting for something. Like he wanted to know if I felt it too. I looked away first. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just words, just a thought, just a conversation. But it sat in the back of my mind, whispering, reminding me that something between us was shifting, whether I wanted it to or not. And then, the night came. I don't know why, but I found myself in the living room again, curled up on the couch, the only light coming from the TV screen. I wasn't really watching it. My mind was too full, too restless. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. Emmanuel. He sat down next to me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him beside me, even in the cool night air. Neither of us spoke at first. We just sat there, watching the flickering light of the screen, the silence between us stretching, charged with something unspoken. And then, without thinking, I turned to look at him. And he was already looking at me. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, in the dim glow of the room, the air thick with words we weren't saying, with feelings we weren't ready to name. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't nothing. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. And whatever it was, whatever was happening between us, it wasn't stopping. I could feel him beside me. The warmth of his body just inches away. The quiet sound of his breathing, steady but slower than usual. Like he was thinking. Like he was waiting. And maybe I was waiting too. I didn't know who moved first. I didn't know if it was me or if it was him, but suddenly, we weren't just sitting anymore. Suddenly, our shoulders were touching. Barely, but enough. And I should have pulled away. I should have shifted, made a joke, broken the tension before it swallowed us both whole. But I didn't. Neither did he. It was so subtle. The way his hand rested on the couch between us, fingers barely grazing my arm. The way his leg pressed against mine, not enough to be obvious, but enough to be felt. Enough to send a shiver up my spine. And then, he said my name. Soft, careful, like he was testing the weight of it in his mouth, like he was testing me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Yeah? For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching, like he was looking for something. Like he was waiting for permission that neither of us should have been giving. And then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, he said, "This feels different, doesn't it?" I wanted to deny it. I wanted to laugh it off, call him crazy, say it was just the way the night made everything feel heavier, more intense. But the truth was, I felt it too. I had felt it since last night. Maybe even before that. I just never let myself name it. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but then his hand. On mine. It wasn't an accident this time. It wasn't like before, a fleeting touch, a mistake. This was deliberate. His fingers curled around mine, hesitant at first, but when I didn't pull away, he didn't let go. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I thought he could hear it. My breath felt trapped in my throat. My skin burned where he touched me. And still, I didn't move. This is wrong, right? I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. He didn't answer. He didn't pull away. He just sat there, holding my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like we weren't crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I should have gotten up. I should have run. I should have laughed and called him ridiculous and turned the whole thing into a joke. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. For the first time in years, someone looked at me like I mattered. And that someone was him. And I knew, even in that moment, even as every rational part of my mind screamed at me to stop, I wasn't going to. We let go. Not suddenly, not all at once, but slowly, as if our fingers were reluctant to separate. As if something in us still didn't want to let go. But we did. And then we just sat there. Not speaking, not looking at each other. The weight of what had just happened pressing down on us so hard I could barely breathe. I don't know how long we sat in that heavy, loaded silence. A minute? An hour? Time felt strange, warped, stretched too thin and too thick all at once. Then, finally, Emmanuel moved. Not much, just the shift of his body, the slow exhale of breath. But it was enough to break whatever was left of the moment. Without a word, he stood up. And for the first time that night, he didn't look at me. He walked away, leaving me sitting there, my skin still burning from where his hand had been, my breath still uneven, my thoughts spiraling into something too tangled to make sense of. I should have stopped him. I should have said something. Anything. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching him disappear down the hallway, the silence between us louder than any words could have been. I went to my room after that, closed the door, crawled into bed. But sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it all over again. The way he looked at me. The way he held my hand. The way I hadn't pulled away. I turned onto my side, then onto my back, then onto my stomach, restless, my body too warm, my mind too loud. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just a moment. Just a stupid, fleeting moment that would mean nothing in the morning. But even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't true. Because something had changed. Something that couldn't be undone. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had barely slept at all. My body was heavy, my head foggy, my stomach tied in knots. But I got up anyway. Pretended everything was fine. Pretended I wasn't thinking about last night. I walked into the kitchen, forcing myself to move like I always did, like nothing had happened, like nothing was different. But he was already there. And the second I saw him, I knew I wasn't the only one who felt it. He didn't look at me. Not really. He kept his head down, focused on whatever he was doing, pouring coffee, staring at the counter, avoiding my eyes like they were something dangerous. Morning, I said, and my voice sounded wrong. Off. Too normal, too forced. Morning, he answered, and his voice was the same. I sat down. He sat across from me. And we ate in silence. Not the kind of silence we were used to. Not the comfortable, easy kind that came from knowing someone so well that words weren't always necessary. This silence was thick. Uncomfortable. Heavy with everything we weren't saying. I tried to act normal. I forced small talk, asked him things I didn't care about, things that didn't matter. And he answered. But his voice was different. Clipped. Careful. Like he was walking on a tightrope and wasn't sure which way he would fall. I hated it. I hated the distance that had appeared between us overnight. I hated the way he wouldn't look at me. I hated the way I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own house, in my own skin. And more than anything, I hated the way I missed the closeness, even though I knew I shouldn't. The day dragged on. We barely spoke. We barely looked at each other. and the weight of everything sat between us like a wall neither of us knew how to break down. And then, our parents came home. They walked in like nothing had changed, because to them, nothing had. They smiled, asked how the weekend was, moved around the house as if everything was exactly as they left it. I forced a smile. I answered their questions. I acted like I wasn't drowning in something too deep to name. And Emmanuel? He barely spoke at all. They didn't notice. They didn't see the way we didn't meet each other's eyes. They didn't hear the way our voices sounded different. They didn't feel the storm still hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to break. To them, we were just their children. Sitting at the same table we always sat at. Eating the same dinner we always ate. Laughing at the same stories they always told. But they didn't know. They didn't know that something had shifted. They didn't know that something irreversible had already happened. They didn't know that no matter how normal we tried to act, no matter how much distance we put between us, nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of it doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade, doesn't loosen its grip. If anything, it grows heavier, pressing down on my chest, creeping into every quiet moment, every unspoken word. I tell myself it was just a stupid moment, a mistake, something we'll never talk about again. And maybe that should be comforting. Maybe I should be relieved. But I'm not. Because every time I see him now, it's different. The air is different. The way we move around each other, careful, calculated, too aware of the space between us, it's different. And I don't know if it's the fear that it might happen again, or the fear that it won't. I catch myself looking for him more often now. Not in an obvious way, but in the quiet, secret moments. I listen for his footsteps. I notice when he walks into a room. I notice when he leaves. I notice how different he is now. Or maybe, how different we are. He doesn't talk as much. He doesn't joke as much. He doesn't sit next to me anymore. And yet, I still feel him there. Still feel his presence, like a phantom touch that hasn't faded. And when our eyes do meet, accidentally, always accidentally, it's not the same as before. There's something else there now. Something tense. Something charged. Something neither of us wants to name, but both of us can feel. I hate it. I hate this feeling. This thing that shouldn't exist, but does. I look at myself in the mirror, searching for the girl I was before all of this. But I don't recognize her anymore. She looks the same. Same face. Same eyes, but there's something in them now. Something clouded. Something lost. And I don't know if I'll ever find my way back. I don't know what to do. I don't even know what I want anymore. I keep telling myself that if I ignore it long enough, if I pretend hard enough, it'll disappear. That I can wake up one day and it'll be like it never happened. Like nothing changed. But it did. And I can't go back. I can't unfeel what I felt. I can't unsee the way he looked at me, the way his hand didn't pull away, the way the air between us was thick with something neither of us wanted to name. I don't know if it was a mistake. I don't know if I regret it. And that's the part that scares me the most. So I need to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where emotions became complicated? Where the lines blurred before you even realized it? Where something innocent turned into something you never saw coming? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this. And if you want more shocking true stories like this, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. You won't believe what happens next.